The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Good morning, America. Good morning, world. Good morning, CHD. Welcome once again. My name is Michael Kane. I am the Director of Advocacy here at Children's Health Defense. We got a battle brewing in New Jersey. New Jersey medical freedom under threat from the health department. Stephanie Lucretia, my dear friend and colleague, is going to be taking us through that. And then changing perceptions on farming with the legendary Dr. Merrill Nass. Once again, we got a good one for you. Make sure you stay the entire time. Before I bring on Stephanie Lucretia, most of you know Steph, to do this segment on New Jersey, which is so important, not just for New Jersey, but for the entire country to understand, because these are patterns. This is happening in many states across the country. I just have one piece of news. Children's Health Defense filed CHD versus McDonald to bring back the religious exemption to vaccination in New York. This is a groundbreaking case that is building off of two important Supreme Court precedents that have just happened in the past year. Because of this critical lawsuit, Wednesday, we are having a webinar, a Zoom with Mary Holland, Sujata Gibson, John Gilmore, and myself to discuss CHD versus McDonald, to learn about this lawsuit, learn about Miller v. McDonald and Mahmoud v. Taylor, the precedents that are important, also get information on what we're going to be doing in Albany at the State House. 2026 is right here. That means the state houses ramp up again. That means good laws, bad laws, yada, all that stuff. So the registration link for the Zoom is in the show notes below. Please register for that. That is all my news for today. And with that, I am going to bring on my dear friend and my colleague here in advocacy, Stephanie Lucretia. Steph, thanks so much for coming on today.
So happy to be here. Great to see you, Michael. Thank you.
So our audience knows you quite well, but I don't know how many people know that your real prominence as an activist in medical freedom came from the Battle of Trenton back in 2019. New York, we lost the religious exemption to vaccination. Look at that crowd there. That's what came out in Jersey, Jersey Strong, to stop the repeal of your religious exemption in New Jersey, and you were successful. I remember that time. It was such a bad time in New York, but looking to Jersey and seeing what you guys were able to do was such a moment of inspiration. And then COVID came right around the corner. What a wild time. But you really rose to prominence, getting on Facebook, streaming, rallying people from that time back in 2019.
Looking at those pictures, it literally brings me chills thinking about what we did. And it really was the pulling together of all the advocates, the parents, everyone, the practitioners, people that showed up. I mean, freezing cold temperatures, people breastfeeding their kids outside of the State House. But we pulled together, and by the last day, we had like a little medical freedom village outside of the State House. And that night, when the gavel dropped and the bill wasn't heard, it was probably one of the best feelings I've ever had in my life, knowing that we were able to be successful. But the battle continues.
Yes, the battle continues. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. The floor and the show is yours, Steph. Please educate us all on what the new battle in Trenton is gearing up to be. Thank you.
Absolutely will. Thank you. So last week, I think it's a week now, we were back in Trenton for the first time in the building since the Battle of Trenton on that fateful evening. And oh boy, what a feeling that was, a mix of so many emotions. We have several bills taking place right now in New Jersey that need our attention. The one that was heard last week was 4894 and 4726. It's a combined bill that basically takes away the ACIP recommendations and moves it to the New Jersey Department of Health, which is a pattern that we're seeing in New Jersey and across many different states. So here to discuss what's at stake, give you some updates on what's happening in Trenton. We have three of my dear friends from New Jersey. I want to bring them on all at the same time. So Dana Weffer is a constitutional and civil rights litigator. She's focused on government accountability and parental rights. She's argued cases from local boards to the New Jersey Supreme Court. She's a co-founder of the New Jersey Homeschool Freedom Association, a homeschooling mom, and holds an MS in biotechnology. She is joined by John Coyle, who is a fierce defender of constitutional rights. He's been challenging vaccine mandates long before the COVID era. Since then, he's helped more than 1,000 employees secure exemptions and filed over 70 lawsuits and arbitrations in state and federal courts on behalf of those who wrongfully denied them. Welcome to you both. Last but certainly not least, my dear friend Maria Quigley. She's a mom of two and a leading advocate for health freedom and parental rights in New Jersey. She's the co-founder of New Jersey Stands Up, a nonpartisan grassroots organization with members in every county dedicated to protecting constitutional rights, medical freedom, and parental authority. You guys rock. Thank you so much for being here this morning. Lots to discuss. Welcome to you all.
Yeah. Thank you, Stephanie.
So I want to start with you, Maria. We were back in Trenton last week, seeing you there, seeing all of the OGs show up and being able to give testimony, and blood pressure rose, no question, listening to the opposing testimony, but it was amazing to be with you. Can you give us a little bit of a recap of what happened last week and discuss what's at stake with 4894 and 4726 and why it's so important for people in New Jersey to be paying attention to these bills, even though they don't directly threaten religious exemptions?
Okay, so let me start with the good news. We packed the committee room. Our advocates came out in force. This issue is not as clear as the simple repeal of the religious exemption. So you just mentioned Trenton in 2019. I was there too. It's a very emotional memory. And we came out in full force. It was organic. And people understood. It was the 11th hour, and they were going to pull away their right to use a religious exemption. They knew how it would affect them personally and their families. It was clear cut. But these issues that we're dealing with now are much more complex. And we're trying to educate folks as best as we can. So we did have a good turnout, and we had well over a dozen advocates that came ready to testify. There were the two bills, as you mentioned previously, S4984 and S4726. But by the time we arrived in the committee room, they had already been combined. So we didn't even know really what we were addressing at that moment. This is one of the tactics that they've been using repeatedly now down in Trenton. But the major concern we understood was still the same. Okay, essentially, the bills are centralizing the power for vaccination policy at the New Jersey Department of Health. Okay, and they're now instructing them not to take guidance any longer from ACIP, the CDC's advisory board, but instead to look to private professional associations, including the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Medical Association, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and so on and so forth. And remember, these are private organizations for the purpose of their membership, not for the public. They hold no public accountability. They face no legislative scrutiny, and they can't be compelled to answer to New Jersey families. So I'm not really sure why the legislature is giving up their authority, right? It's removing their longstanding oversight role, and they're handing the broad authority to the New Jersey Department of Health, which is then delegating their decision-making virtually to private professional associations, as I said. This is very concerning. If legislators are giving up their role, if the DOH now is going to lean on private groups that hold no responsibility to the public, who exactly will the public be able to hold accountable? Parents need to understand what's going on. And if the New Jersey Department of Health has so much authority to be able to change vaccine recommendations quickly, without any legislative review, without transparent data, without a predictable process, because it hasn't been defined, how will informed consent be meaningfully protected? We don't know, and these are very important questions that need to be answered.
100%. And, one of the things that I think is very concerning, and I'm going to skip around a little bit here, but the New Jersey Department of Health is also trying to simultaneously pass a regulation that could potentially impact religious exemptions. So I want to talk a little bit about what the implications are of these two things moving together simultaneously, because we know during COVID, these recommendations became mandates, and they're basically piecing together a puzzle where, like you said, Maria, the legislative body is washing their hands of the vaccine recommendations, the exemptions. And what we did in 2019 in the Battle of Trenton, where we held those legislators' feet to the fire, we could never recreate that with an unelected, appointed bureaucratic body who has no accountability to the public. So Dana, can you talk a little bit about some of the concerns that you have with these two things moving together, and how we've had no public hearing when it comes to that Department of Health regulation?
Yeah, sure. So I think, like Maria said, this issue is a little more complex than something like black and white, like whether the religious exemption exists. And part of the reason for that is because the way the sanitary code has developed in New Jersey. So we're dealing with the police power of the state, right? It's only the states that have police power. That is definitively not a power that's held by the federal government at all. And because we're talking about policy, it is specifically a power that resides in the legislature. And then the executive branch is responsible for executing what the legislature says. So through New Jersey history, we first had a board of health that was made up of experts and professionals in the medical profession. That was the early 1900s. And then New Jersey created the Public Health Council. And the Public Health Council was a 10-member board that was comprised of experts from various areas. And they were the council to which the legislature delegated its authority to adopt the sanitary code, which is really what has the most impact in our everyday lives. It covers every possible conceivable range of the state police power, which is already very broad. So what happened was in 2005, Dick Cody did a reorganization of the Department of Health. And in the course of that reorganization, he took the authority that was delegated to the Public Health Council, a body made up of 10 people who would have to agree by a majority to amend the code. And he claimed, through the reorganization, claimed to have taken that authority and moved it to the Department of Health. Now we're in a very confusing situation because you have this reorganization that was done that purports to reside the power within the Department of the Commissioner of Health, the Commissioner. And then you have the statutes which still exist and say that the power resides within the PHC. And I think that one of the issues we're seeing here in New Jersey is that even the state itself is not terribly clear on what process needs to be followed to amend the regulations. The law says the Public Health Council, and the law also requires a public hearing before the sanitary code is amended. But in this case, the state has proceeded to allow the commissioner essentially to act on that authority, and they haven't held the public hearing. So that's a really big concern and problem. And it's also a deprivation of the people of New Jersey to be able to go and participate in the process. And it's obviously a very different thing, as Maria said, having the power reside in one person who can change it on the flip of a dime versus a deliberative body of 10 experts. So that is the primary concern here, is consolidating the power within the executive. And then more than that, that wasn't even a clear delegation of power in New Jersey like it was in other states. It was sort of seized by the executive in 2005.
It's crazy. And the thing that scares me the most is the fact that there's no liability. So I know the answer to the question, but I just want to say it out loud so the people in the back hear us. The New Jersey Department of Health making recommendations for what vaccines go into our children's body without scientific study based on ACIP, who has been the golden nugget of all information related to vaccines when they were making ridiculous and horrible recommendations. And now that the tide is turning, New Jersey is wanting to peel away. New Jersey Department of Health is not going to be liable for any injuries or deaths related to the vaccines that they are recommending for our children, correct?
Yeah, so essentially what would happen is the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act applies to any vaccine that's on the schedule at all. But if we came to a point where the Department of Health had different recommendations than ACIP, and if a vaccine were removed from the childhood schedule altogether, it could create this tension between the state It could create an issue for pharmaceutical companies who could be facing liability if they follow the state law without being on the childhood schedule. So it creates the situation where there's a lot of potential ways things could go and potential conflicts in the future. Which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing for medical freedom. It's sort of like before it was the federal government and the state acting together, and now they're sort of splitting up, which might be helpful.
Yeah, well, I mean, it all remains to be seen at this point. There's a lot of moving parts to this. And John, I want to talk to you a little bit because you work very closely with Dana. So talk to me about what brought you two together in this new firm and some of the work that you're doing with the COVID cases.
I think Dana and I, our match was made in COVID. We had our own separate law firms and we pursued everything you've talked about: medical freedom, constitutional rights, employees, and vaccination resistance across the board. And as is obvious by this show and everything that's going on, there's a lot of future battles coming in the very near future. So we decided to combine our efforts to really take two sets of people who are working very strongly in overlapping areas and think, we need to gear up for battle, which is what we're doing right now. And that's why we're here.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I want to just bring out is the pink elephant in the room. You know, New Jersey, during 2019, we were very, very, very united across all fronts. And there's a lot of people who were calling what we're doing right now fear-mongering, that we're fear-mongering, that there's nothing to be afraid of. There's no reason to fight this. New Jersey has deviated from ACIP schedules before. But when you're codifying that into law, what are your thoughts about how important it is for people to go back to that COVID era spirit where we rolled up our sleeves, we worked across party lines, we worked across different groups with the one goal of stopping that bill and protecting our parental rights and our children's health?
It's the proverbial pot and a frog in boiling water, right? Slow by slow, COVID brought everything into forefront, and the 2019 battle for Trenton, it was in everyone's face. This is being taken away from you. It was easy to mobilize everybody. Right now, it's death by 1,000 paper cuts. Every time the state issues something else, and let's also be clear, some of the things the state is doing, they're explicitly saying are in response to what RFK is doing in Washington. We need to stop this and react this. Every time the state of New Jersey is doing something about vaccines, you should pay utmost attention. They are playing a long game where they're going to do everything they can to deprive us of all the rights that we hold dear in every possible way. And it's just 1,000 paper cuts here, there, and this. Is each of these in and of themselves the most earth-shattering thing as much as getting everyone in Trenton in 2019 was? No, but that's the point. Right? They're making it easy for people to look at something and be like, that's not a huge critical issue. But as Maria was leading, one of the advocates leading the way on the challenging the health code changes, over 2,000 people submitted comments on this. That is virtually unheard of in the regulatory process. People are wising up to this, and shows like this and everything that everyone on this panel is doing is telling people, don't be fooled. This is not just a little bit of a deal, a little bit of some sort of change whatsoever. The state has a clear mandate to take away your rights on medical freedom and impose their control on everybody that they grasped during COVID, lost a little, and they don't want to let this go. And now is the time to stay vigilant, even if it's not as urgent an issue, seemingly, as 2019.
Agreed, 100%. And, you know, these COVID cases that you guys are handling, they're still unfolding 5 years later. So let's talk about how the courts are handling these existing COVID cases and what you see for COVID litigation in 2026.
I'll start, I guess, and then Dan jump in. The good news for everybody is if you manage to make it this far, 4 or 5 years after your exemptions, you're seeing a much different landscape in the courts than you were back in 2022 and 2021. 2021, 2022, everybody was pushing a boulder up a hill to even get your day in court. Cases are being dismissed left and right. And here in New Jersey, the federal courts in the Third Circuit have been terribly hostile to religious freedom, specifically about vaccination. The tide is turning. Even in places that seem unlikely, other states, New York, California, slow creep back to judges realizing that the decisions that they made that were against the law that were against precedent that they somehow felt justified to, and they haven't explained it to me, but they seem justified because they were in the COVID pandemic, are starting to get unwound. And the courts are much more favorable right now to the idea of people having vaccine rights and religious rights. So the tide is trending further. It was a dire, dark day for many years, but I feel good with COVID litigation right now.
That's so encouraging to hear. I'm really praying that people get their day in court and they get the justice that they so desperately need, because for so long people have been silenced. Dana, do you want to add anything to what John just said?
I think maybe I have a little bit less of a rosy view than John. We reside in the worst part of the country when it comes to these issues. And, on the one hand, it has meant like it all comes down to individual judges, and you never really know what somebody's personal experience is, how it might affect them, because everyone has an opinion on this. It's not like a typical case where you go and it's all new to the judge. People have ideologies and views. And so it comes down to that. But we have this split in the country right now, particularly on the question of what constitutes a religion and what constitutes a religious belief. And I think that once that gets taken up and resolved by the Supreme Court, the whole landscape will be much clearer for everyone. But we still have a lot of bad case law related not to religious exemptions necessarily, but just related to the power of the state to impose mandates generally. And so it's my opinion that we can't stop fighting, because even if we don't have another pandemic for another 10 years, like our kids are going to be dealing with the precedent that was set during COVID. So I think we need to be actively fighting to have these precedents overturned.
I agree. And I think from a legal perspective, that's 100% true. And I also think from an advocate perspective, it's really easy to get cozy and complacent and think that COVID is over. Things are not that serious. I don't need to show up. Someone else is going to do it for me. So Maria, I want to get your closing thoughts for advocates. What would you say to a parent, a practitioner, a grandparent, someone that's listening right now and thinking, it's not that serious. I don't need to show up. It's going to be fine.
I invite them to stay connected. Again, we're not trying to fearmonger. We're trying to connect dots at a higher level, trying to paint the picture of all of the piece parts, as John so eloquently said, all of the paper cuts that we're enduring right now. They paint a not so attractive picture of what's happening, both at the state level in particular. So I invite them to go to njstandsup.org, sign up with us. We don't overwhelm you with email, but we will keep you alerted to various take actions and other important issues. Then go to the calls to action tab, and you can read for yourself all about the health code changes, what the implications may be, and how you can take action. There are lots of actions to take. Even though the public comment period for the health codes has officially ended, there are lots of suggestions there about who you can contact, who you can ask questions of. You don't have to state your opposition. You can simply ask questions for more clarity, because that's important. We need to be having this conversation openly and with more and more people. And then, of course, under the legislation tab, you can look specifically. We've articulated what's of most concern during this lame duck period, which thankfully only lasts a few more weeks. But we're watching these bills very, very carefully, including S 4984, and we'll see what happens. But it's too important to turn a blind eye to.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you, Maria, for all of your work, for being such a leader in the advocacy space in New Jersey. It's always such a pleasure to work side by side with you. John and Dana, if this New Jersey Department of Health regulation does go through and we do not have a public hearing, which I have heard nothing about, what are the next steps? What can we expect here in New Jersey?
If they do that, I think they'll have broken the law. I don't think that they will have followed the process in the way that they're supposed to. So we'll be looking at next steps.
Okay, excellent. And how can people stay connected with you both, follow the work that you're doing, and be in contact for all things New Jersey?
I'm on X at We for Law Offices.
And I'm on X as well, John Coyle, law firm John Coyle. So as 2026 rolls around, as we're combining our efforts, we will have more easy ways to follow both of what we do. Right now, it's hard to get all that up and running because we're still fighting every day in court. So we're working on everything. But 2026 will come more developments, easier to follow us. But in the meantime, look for me or Dana on X, and Maria. We're always popping in from time to time on any of her Zooms. So we'll do what we can to help. You'll find us. If you need help, reach out.
I appreciate you all so much for everything that you do. Thank you so much for being with me this morning. And we will definitely be back as this lame duck season unravels and we continue to get those paper cuts to bring you back for updates on how we can stay involved in this advocacy process in New Jersey. So thank you all so much for being here this morning. I appreciate it. And we'll see you back soon. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Thank you. So for those of you that are watching and you want to do something meaningful right now to help turn the tide in New Jersey and to stop the bills that we discussed, we do have an action alert on our action alert portal that you can sign for S4894 and 4726. It's the combined bill. You can go on with one click to take action to protect medical freedom in New Jersey. If you have not done so yet, please go on. The link will be in the show notes that you can very easily take action. And then I encourage you to please share on your social medias. If you have any lists that you email to, we need all hands on deck. These next couple of weeks are definitely going to be interesting. So do what you can. Do your part, stay involved, and thank you so much for tuning in. And please stay tuned for Meryl Nass, Crisis Save Our Food and Farm with Carrie Richards coming up next. Thank you so much for having me this morning. I'll be back soon. Happy holidays to you all. Stay vigilant and remember your energy matters, your voice matters, and your courage is contagious. So keep up the amazing work.
Good morning, CHD. I'm happy to be back with another show about food, farming, and ranching. And today, my guest is Carrie Richards, who is a fourth-generation rancher in Northern California, who has been converting her ranch to one that is regenerative, which means she is no longer using chemicals on her pasture land and is raising essentially organic meat and cows and sheep and lambs as well. So welcome, Carrie.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So can you tell us a bit about your property and how you came to be a rancher?
Yeah, so we are in Northern California in a small town called Oregon House that no one's ever heard of. And my great-grandfather purchased this property in 1941. So I am, like you said, fourth generation. And we moved up to the ranch after my two kiddos were born in 2016 to take over from my dad.
So had your dad been only a rancher, or had he had a secondary occupation?
No, he was a developer for years down in Sacramento. And our family ran this ranch. Usually it was, my father, my great-grandfather, and my grandfather. So I'm actually the first woman in the family to run it. So that's exciting. But he moved up there after retiring as a developer and moved up there and started running the ranch in 1989.
So like so many other farmers and ranchers, he really did have a secondary occupation while running the ranch, to help bring in money and keep this business going, even though he had a considerable amount of property, it looks like. How many acres, how many cows are you raising?
Right now, our ranch is 6,500 acres. We're right north of the Yuba River in California.
Let me interrupt and tell the audience that's 10 square miles.
It's very big.
Yeah.
There are parts of it I've never seen. That is, I have to say that right now. And also, we have 200 mother cows, but I also have an additional 100 to 150 feeder cows that I process that go into my beef company, Richards Regenerative.
Okay. And all these animals are grazing on your land, correct?
Yes.
And
yes. We also have leases, which we can go into if you'd like. I know it's a lot of land that we have, but it's not, also the grass is not perfect for finishing animals and or raising baby calves all times of the year. So we do have supplemental leases, as well as our mama cows live half time at our ranch and half time at my cattle partner's ranch, who is also a regenerative rancher and manages holistically.
So how did you convert this ranch, this huge amount of property, from traditional agriculture using herbicides and chemicals and fertilizers to an organic ranch?
Well, it wasn't easy. It was a very big mindset shift, basically, for my old employee at the time and my father. To be completely blunt, the program we were doing wasn't working, which was raising animals and selling them at the auction. And as my dad got older, he was working that side job less. And we had to figure out how to make the ranch work as its own standalone business, basically.
So again, let me interrupt for the audience. So here, these people had a huge amount of property, worth a lot of money, and yet they were not able to make a living off of it alone. And her dad had to have a side job. And here she is. She's got this huge property. She's got loads of cows, and she's got to finally figure out how to make a profit so that her family can live off of it. Maybe her siblings also. And she has farm workers whom she has to pay a salary to. So you would think that on that much property with that many cows, she could make a great living. But that is not how the system works anymore. And it hasn't worked that way for a long time. But it's been particularly bad these last 5 years. Although I have to admit, the price of cows, the price of meat went up dramatically last year because there was such a shortage, because so many ranchers had gone out of business.
Yep. And then also, now that the cattle price is high, a lot of these older ranchers are selling out. They're selling off their herds, they're paying off their debt, and they're getting out of the business. So we have a new problem that we have to deal with, which is people voluntarily getting out of ranching.
Yes, because it's been so hard for so long.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell us now about the process of regenerative agriculture and switching over. What were the problems? What made you switch over? Was the land depleted?
Yes, we were having a lot of pink eye issues, which happens in the summer when you have cows kind of not rotating pastures often enough, and the parasites hatch and they get in their eyes and they get irritated, and you have a big mess in your herd. So that was one issue we were having constantly. We also had a gigantic hay bill. We were bringing in feed because once the feed is hot, it gets hot and dry in the summer, you have to supplement. So you have to supplement with something that's high protein. So we had it was $130,000 is what we were paying every year to bring in hay to feed the cows throughout the summer and fall. And then we had disease issues. So I went headfirst into every conference, every book, everything I could find on doing it a different way. And I basically reached out to American Grass-Fed Association, which is a grass-fed certification that we still hold today. And I asked...
Okay, let me interrupt.
Yeah.
The audience. So it's considered that the meat is much healthier if the cows eat hay or grass, which is what they traditionally have always eaten, except for other scrub products. But what's happened in the United States is farmers are growing all this corn and soy and then processing that into ultra-processed food products and feed for cows. So cows are getting this sort of denuded, non-nutritional junk that is made from corn or soy, and that is what most cows are being fed when they can't eat grass. So in the United States, most cows do eat grass for much of their life, but not for all of it, and especially in the end where they can be fattened up on this stuff, but then the meat is not such good quality. Now go back.
No problem. So we were having issues with, cost as well as disease. So I dove into trying to figure this out. I found the Savory Institute, which is a company that is global actually and teaches holistic management. And holistic management basically means looking at the whole. You're not just looking at production. You're not just looking at the animals. You're not just looking at the feed. You're looking at the ecosystem, the region you're in, the people you're feeding, all the people that you're supporting in your business. You're looking at the whole picture. So that to me made way more sense than just focusing on yields and focusing on inputs and focusing on spraying. And so I basically came to my father and said, I want to change the way we do things. It was really rough at first, but now he appreciates what I've done years later. But it was hard because there was no map. Like he hadn't done it that way. My grandfather didn't do it that way. And so we were kind of going in blind. But
let me point out that your grandfather, great-grandfather, they bought this ranch just as the Green Revolution was coming in.
right.
So it was the big new thing. This was going to, make yields so much better. And so, of course, they bought into it, like 99% of other farmers in the United States.
Right.
And so this land now for 80 years was basically doused with chemicals.
Right. And so we actually stopped using chemicals right about 10 years before my siblings and I got involved. So it's not just me. There are 4 of us. And one of my brothers, Tom, and my sister Noelle and I are the ones that started Richards Regenerative. It used to be Richards Grass-Fed Beef, but now it's Richards Regenerative. And we started selling wholes and halves off the farm. And we were selling it to family and friends at swim meets and book clubs. And we started off real scrappy. And then now we've grown to, we sell about 1,000 head a year. We have 3 other partner ranches that we buy from. And what that means is our ranch, believe it or not, can't supply cattle through the entire year. So we work with other ranchers up and down California during the seasons that grass is the most healthy. To make sure that we're pulling the best, healthiest, fattest animals off of those different properties throughout the year. So we have a consistent supply.
So you're having to put your cows on trucks and move them, hundreds of cows, several times a year.
Correct.
But that is giving them the best feed.
That's keeping them on feed and way less hay. They were about 50-50 feet on the ground and hay. And now they're maybe like 5% hay and 95% grazing. So it's been like exponential in the health of the animal, as well as we haven't had pink eye issues in years.
The other thing you're doing is to move them very frequently from one pasture to another, so you can equalize the amount of manure in the different paddocks. Is that correct?
Correct, and also eat the pasture evenly, so that they don't just eat all the good stuff, leave the weeds, and then the weeds take over. So if you put them in smaller paddocks with more animals and move them more frequently, they eat the pasture a lot more evenly.
Which means it's a lot more time intensive, a lot more person intensive.
It is. And we don't actually do that all throughout the year. We do it during a certain times in the growing season. So in the early spring into early summer, when those grasses are really thriving and we don't want to either graze them too hard or wait too late until the seed head comes up, we graze them right in that middle zone, and it keeps those plants healthy because we're giving them rest. And so we can come back to them multiple times.
And so what's the difference in productivity between the chemical pasture and the organic pasture now?
Well, the first year that I convinced my employees to take the animals off the front pasture, we just let it rest. Like it probably hadn't rested in 15 or 20 years. The grass was up to my neck because there had been so much manure and so much feces from all of those years of those cows just sitting there. It was just ripe. It needed rest so badly. So that was the first super exciting thing that happened.
So what happens when you rest a pasture?
It gives
happens to the
those
soil?
plants, yeah, it gives those plants time to grow, time to put their seeds down, and they're not basically sloughing their roots. Because if you keep grazing a plant when it's trying to rebuild after it's been grazed, it'll slough the roots to feed itself, and then it'll just go unhealthy, and then it will not come back and not be a robust. It'll not be a robust plant. So you have to give it rest, just like if you go to the gym. You can't go to the gym 10 days in a row. You need rest or else you're going to get sick. So it's the same thing with plants.
And what about the microbiome of the soil?
Yes. So the more that you give it rest, the more it has time to feed the microbes in the soil, and then the soil microbes then feed the plant, and you have this symbiosis going on in your ecosystem that actually keeps everything healthy, and it's not out of balance because you're giving everything the time it needs to heal. And that's what the issue can be at some ranches. You bring in all these animals, you graze it to the dirt, and then you leave and go to the next lease or pasture. But then the sun hits the soil all summer and kills all the fertility, and you have to basically start over every year. And you're not keeping those plants alive and healthy. And that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to keep a good cover on our lands that we graze, as well as our pastures at all times of the year. So no more bare soil.
Now, you have put a lot of effort into being able to sell directly to consumers.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very different than most ranchers. And because of USDA rules, what have you done to make that possible?
Well, yes, with USDA rules, we cannot technically sell the meat that we process on the ranch to our neighbors. We can sell them a whole or a half cow, but we cannot sell them individually packed meat unless it is done at a USDA facility. So the way that we figured this out is we have a partner. Their name is Creamco Meats, and that is our distributor down in the Bay Area. And they do all of our processing for us. So we send all of our animals to the same slaughterhouse that we've been using for 7 years. And then they go to our processor, and they have the USDA bug that they can put on that meat. So some of that meat gets shipped to Texas, where we have a 3PL where they deliver our meat across the whole country, which is super exciting. We didn't have that before. And then some of that meat we ship back up to the ranch because we can sell it now that it has the USDA bug. But that adds cost.
Yes.
So like if I just sold it straight off the ranch, it'd probably save like $3 a pound because it wouldn't have to go all the way down to our kill facility and then all the way to our distributor and then back up to the ranch. So because of all these rules, we're adding more cost.
I'm going to emphasize that. So I have a friend who has a few cows and lambs, and he says the cost to go through a USDA facility rather than being able to sell the animals direct from the farm as cuts or as a portion of an animal's, he thinks it's $4 a pound. So I want the consumer to realize these USDA rules, which allegedly are for safety, because there has to be an inspector on site, but the inspector does almost nothing. And so the meat processed on a farm is really just as safe, some people say more safe, than meat that has been processed through a USDA inspected facility. But you, the consumer, are paying at least $3 or $4 a pound more for the privilege of putting these cows on trucks to get them to a USDA facility, which for some farmers means taking them hundreds of miles.
Correct. It is very inefficient. It is only efficient if you are a giant operation that owns your own kill facility, processing trucks, all the things. Then you can push that cost wherever you need to. But for an independent meat company, it is very costly.
So, have you been able to make this ranch profitable?
Yes. And it's not just because of the animals. It's because I have been able to find a network of amazing ranchers and mentors that have helped me look at the bigger picture, look at the whole, just like holistic management training makes you do, And so we've been able to work with school districts and universities to make sure we get all of our trim that comes from the cow, which is about 70% of what comes off of a cow, which is
Okay,
trim.
so explain what trim is.
It's ground beef before it becomes ground beef. So when you're cutting the animal up, there's, the ribeyes and the fillets and the New Yorks and all the stuff everybody knows about. The rest is the trim. And that's what goes into your burgers and your ground beef. And we were able to partner with school districts in California to take a lot, if not almost all of our ground beef. We also work with Sprouts Market, and they take packaged, logoed ground beef. So you can buy our products in all the Sprouts on the West Coast. And then we're able to I still have a pretty robust on-farm whole and half program where I sell direct to family and friends. So we still
After
do
it's been
that.
processed in the USDA facility?
Not those. Those are the on-farm harvest at just a state inspected plant where you're buying a whole or a half animal.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And then the rest of our product goes to our 3PL out of Texas, which can be distributed across the states.
And what do people say about the quality of your meat compared to other meat?
Yeah. Well, they love it. We work really hard to make sure those animals are finished because it's not as easy finishing grass-fed on pasture as it is throwing an animal in a feedlot and putting
Again,
it
you
on
have
ration.
to explain to the audience what that means, finishing on pasture versus feedlot.
Okay, thank you. You're right. I do need to explain that. So if you put an animal in a feedlot, they are confined.
Well, wait, let's tell the audience what happens with most cows in the United States is that the last few months of their lives, if not more than that, they are given these grain products, either the grains themselves or these horrible, useless, ultra-processed garbage that comes from corn and soy production when they've taken the good stuff out of whatever is good. They've taken the oil out, they've taken the sugar out, they've taken the vitamins out, and then they feed the animals what's left. But that fattens them up. And so what you're looking for, and they may give them hormones as well and antibiotics to fatten them up. And because they want them optimally fat, right before slaughter. Now, and so that's called finishing the animal. And what Carrie's talking about is leaving the animals on grass and pasture for that finishing, but you still want them fat. You still want them meat marbled if possible. And so how do you do that?
So our tactic is we start the finishing process about 6 months before that animal is going to go to slaughter. So different times of the year are really good finishing times, like in California, April, May, June, late in the fall, sometimes are really good times. So we are basically planning where we're going to buy from which producer in our little group, what time of year we're going to buy from who. And we want to make sure to take that animal off of the land and send to slaughter right as they're still gaining weight, but they are also just at the prime time in grass where it hasn't headed out, so the seed hasn't come off the head yet, but the grass is fully mature. And that is the key to having the right carbohydrate to protein ratio for a cow to get really big and fat naturally on grass. And that has been our strategy for years, and it's creating a really consistent product.
Great. So now tell us how you and others managed to get organic, local meat into schools and universities in California. Tell us how that happened.
It actually happened right before the pandemic. It took basically 3 nonprofits, California Department of Food and Ag, multiple distributors, multiple ranchers, all coming together and saying, how can we create products that the schools can buy? Because a lot of schools don't even have kitchens. And so they needed a cooked burger and they needed a raw burger for those that didn't have kitchens. And so the cooked burger was actually a big hurdle. And so it was about 2019. We were trying to figure this out. All these people, we were on Zooms with like 20 people, multiple Zooms. And then the world shut down. And we were like, and then about 2 weeks later, when COVID happened, they were like, oh, we're going to continue to feed everybody, all the schools. And we create 4 or 5 products. So there's a hot dog, a burger, a cooked burger, ground beef, and cooked ground beef. They call it ground beef crumble because there's still so many schools that don't have kitchens.
Which is crazy.
And so I know it's crazy. And there are lots of incentives and grants that are helping schools. Like my kid's school just got a kitchen for the first time in like 30 years. So there are grants trying to reverse the mess that we've created, but it is slow. But we're really proud to be part of the school program. And we're also in 11 universities and UC Davis Hospital.
So during the pandemic, starting in either 2021 or 2022, the federal government did give the states money to distribute for a farm to school program. And then you told me that California also, the state of California, put in money as well, because obviously your meat is going to be more expensive than, than when it comes from Cisco or some huge conglomerate that uses the cheapest ingredients possible. So that federal money jumped up very high, and schools here, even in Maine, the schools were open with their kitchens, and they were making lunches and then using school buses to distribute the food to kids all around the neighborhood who could collect it off the school buses. It's quite an extraordinary program, and it cost quite a bit of money. Many billions of dollars. I think it was, I can't remember how much, but certainly over $20 billion a year for that kind of program from the federal end. And so this was very good. It created a precedent. Now you've got schools who are actually, people are learning to cook again. They're starting to prepare meals, and they've got this high quality product to feed the children. But the federal money for the pandemic has gone away, and the state money may go away too. And then what? So how do we make this work going forward?
Right. So California actually still has state money coming in for the food to schools program. So we do have that going on, but you're right. We need to figure out how to buy regionally, which in my mind makes so much more sense, and it's so much more stable, because that's exactly what happened in the pandemic when we couldn't get all the imports. It was like immediately everybody pivoted to regional. So if we can continue to have these conversations and not just pretend like, oh, we figured it out, it's over, which is what happens sometimes. Like right now we have a system that's working, but we have to continually figure out how to keep the system working and how to continue to pivot and work with these bigger conglomerates of schools to do bigger orders, because it can't be just my operation. I'm not big enough to supply the entire state of California. So if we can figure out how to do a more aggregated system where we can utilize the ranches all up and down the state, it creates security for those ranches and it creates security for the state. So it takes, again, a mindset shift, which is really hard to do when it's kind of the way we always done it kind of operation when it comes to ranching.
Yeah. Let me give you some information. During the pandemic in 2020, the Maine government, where I live, gave a grant of inspection to 3 custom slaughterhouses. So these were small slaughterhouses that did not have any USDA certification, and they allowed them to process meat that could be sold within the state. So we have a precedent for actually ignoring the USDA rules when push came to shove and people didn't know where they were going to get their meat from. And so, it was done once, we can do it again.
That's right.
And the state can inspect these custom slaughter. They're called custom slaughterhouses, the ones that are not USDA inspected or state inspected on a 24/7 basis. Every moment that they're processing meat, a USDA or state inspector has to be there. But in these custom slaughterhouses, that is not the case. Somebody comes, looks around every so often and says, yeah, you're doing things right. We like it, keep going. But they're not allowed to sell the meat. The meat is only to be given back to the owner of the cow or the deer or whatever animal they're processing. So anyway, I'm going to repeat that because it's an interesting precedent, and I couldn't find it in any other state where the state said, look, we are giving these custom slaughterhouses a quote unquote grant of inspection, which means we're acting like we inspected them 24/7, and we're allowing them to process meat for sale within the state. Now, so you've made this profitable because you've worked your butt off trying to find ways to sell directly to the customer, sell to schools, sell to institutions. And we need that to happen around the country. We need to have local producers selling their meat and their vegetables and fruits directly to consumers with much less rigmarole, much less moving of the animals around in future. So I hope that I can work with you on that as we move forward and try to fix, the bottlenecks that are set up to make things very difficult for consumers and producers in the United States and make things work for the mega corporations, but not for anyone else.
Right.
What was your biggest challenge in creating a regenerative ranch?
Oh, God, there's all the challenges. I would say the biggest challenge was being confident that I believed in what this new way of ranching could do for our animals and our land, but I didn't have a map. I didn't have we've done it this way and we know it's going to work. I had to just go on with my gut. I had to go with my gut. I had idols that I looked up to in the ranching community, like Will Harris at White Oak Pastures. And I knew if he could figure out, I could figure it out. And so that was really hard because I was battling myself. If something would go wrong, I would question what I was doing. And then I would worry that my father was going to be upset and that the family was going to be upset. Because when you own land like this, it's kind of part of you. And so you don't want to do the land wrong and your family wrong and your legacy wrong. And so it's really, it weighs on you. It weighs on you when you make a bad decision. And so the confidence I had, I don't know where it came from, but trying to keep that confidence going when things were tough was very difficult.
And you're a particularly ingenious sort of person with a lot of self-confidence.
Thank you.
So for a farmer or rancher to succeed these days, they have to be really smart. They have to figure out a lot of things. And yet they get a lifestyle that the rest of us can envy, even though there's a lot of hard work involved. What's it been like for your children to live on the ranch?
They love it. When you have kids that live on the ranch, you have one that's usually really into it and one that's like, whatever. So I kind of have that going on. But my daughter is all in and she loves it and has a horse and the whole deal. But what I like to say is that we've kind of done a bad marketing job for farming and ranching, telling everybody and the younger generation that it's sun up and sundown and it doesn't pay well and it's the hardest job in the world. And I feel like that narrative needs to change. And we need to start showing different angles and different ways and being more resourceful and showing people that, yes, you can work sun up, sundown, but you can also have a life and you can also get your kids to soccer practice and you can have a life and be a rancher and or a farmer. We just have to be a little bit more creative and you have to understand what your priorities are and try really hard to build a life and a business around those priorities and not sacrifice the priorities for the good of the ranch or vice versa.
Do you have any other advice for beginning farmers or would-be farmers and ranchers?
I thought about this before this interview because I was like, what would I do different? And what I did that was the most resourceful thing for me was we were already doing American Grass-Fed Association certification, and I reached out to them directly. I trusted their judgment, I trusted their certification, and I knew that any resources they were going to give me were going to be helpful. And so that is how I found the Savory Institute and Holistic Management was through them. That's how I reached out to other producers that were near me in California. And I was able to find other people doing what I wanted to do. So if you are particularly into a style of ranching, whether it's organic, biodynamic, any of those, I would reach out to the certifications that you trust and ask for resources, because they are going to be the ones that are connected to the like-minded people that you either want to become or that you want to work with.
And I would say that the ranchers today don't feel like they're in competition with each other. They feel like they're all together together against the monopolies in the meat industry.
Yes.
So you don't have to worry that they're going to steer you wrong. They want you to succeed, because if you succeed, they will succeed too.
Right.
Anything else before we end?
That's it, really. I really appreciate you reaching out to all of us farmers and ranchers to try to encourage people to keep doing this, because it is the backbone of the U.S., and we need to keep our food home. We need to feed everyone with the food that we're growing and not just ship it to other countries. Like, I really, really want this to be a lifestyle that can continue, because it is incredibly rewarding. And when you can create healthy food to share with your family and friends and customers, there's nothing more rewarding than that.
Thank you so much, Carrie. This has been a great interview.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Can you tell us your name, please?
My name's Patty Haller from Seattle, Washington.
And you had 3 Modernas.
I did.
Now, what made you decide to take those shots?
I was actually pretty excited to take them. I have an elderly mother that I was seeing quite often, and I was just hearing in the media how important it was to protect the elderly, including my mom. So I was really eager, and I waited for my turn. I was 59 at the time, and saw all the age groups get their turn to get the shot. When they stopped at 60 and started vaccinating different corporate groups, say, Amazon and Microsoft, I even wrote to the Department of Health and said, please, can I jump in line because of taking care of my mom. So I was an eager person to get this shot.
So you took the first one. How did you feel after the first one?
I don't remember. I was a little bit tired, but there wasn't anything that I really noticed.
And so you went ahead and took another one?
Yep, right on time.
And how did you feel after that?
I felt okay after that one too. It was really over the next several months that I started having problems, especially after the booster. But the initial reactions after having the shots were pretty mild, just a little bit tired.
So talk to us about what happened after you took the Moderna booster.
Well, I was noticing I was having a lot of problems with my skin, and I was used to having a few problems. I had eczema and I had medications for that, but it had always been really easy to control, and I didn't really even use my prescriptions very often. But after the booster and over the next several months, I noticed my skin just getting insanely difficult to control, with rashes all over my torso, which hadn't happened before. I had keratoses popping up.
What's that?
They're the things that the dermatologist will burn off in your visit. I think they're made of keratin, and they're just raised areas on your body. I don't know anything more about that. I was just sort of shocked at how many I had. They're not considered cancerous, but they can be irritating, so the dermatologist will burn them off.
And what else was happening to you afterwards?
Well, the rashes were scary. Again, I had them all over my body. They would fluctuate during the day, sometimes, and they looked different all the time, and they would bleed sometimes.
Were they lumpy rashes?
Well, some of them, sometimes they'd look like hives. Sometimes they would be little red dots that were almost evenly spaced, so I looked like I had polka dots. I had just these eruptions. I would have a hard time describing exactly. It was just sort of eruptions of all different types of skin problems, and I did go to get help right away. I had a few dermatology appointments, but the answers from the dermatologist were always, here's some steroids, that'll clear it up. There didn't seem to be a lot of curiosity about why I had these, and when I asked about whether it could possibly be due to the Moderna vaccine, that line of questioning was shut down pretty quickly. I was open to these skin problems being caused by all sorts of things. I'm an oil painter, an artist, so I suspected it might be my art supplies. I'm a pretty scientifically minded person, so I slowly changed up what I was doing to kind of isolate different things I thought might be causing these problems. I changed my diet, gave up gluten, really limited grains, really limited alcohol and sugar. I started intermittent fasting. Anyways, I was working my way down just lists that my naturopath was helping me with, especially, of all different things to try. And I was still getting the rashes. And I just felt that I was eliminating possible causes without an answer, and that just made me more suspicious. I was aware of the work of FLCCC and Peter McCullough and Pierre Corey, Jessica Rose, because as an artist I listened to podcasts for several hours a day. And I remember one day Pierre Corey saying, "Oh, the rashes." And I thought, oh, maybe there is something to my suspicions. And then I found accounts on Twitter that were case reports, medical reports of vaccine injured people, and I saw a lot of rashes, and the rashes looked like mine. And I guess that was really difficult for me, because I felt like someone could have helped me before. And I know this is not a dramatic story about me losing a loved one. It was basically, I had rashes, but it was very isolating. The few conversations I had where I'd talk to friends about what I was doing to help myself, I found I was really willing to say things like, I think it might be cauliflower or cinnamon. You know, I suspected for a while that I had a vitamin C deficiency, and I could easily talk about that. But if I brought up that it was possibly Moderna, even though I knew there was this research out there that showed that there were dermatological impacts, I felt like that was shut down. And so my skin has gotten so much better. I've worked really hard on it. I still have a few problems, and I'm very interested in meeting other people who might have similar problems to mine to strategize. One odd impact I had was I had pain in my axillary lymph nodes which were the lymph nodes in your armpits. They would show up on mammograms, and apparently that I knew that was fairly common soon after the vaccines, but mine were persisting, and I still have them, even though my last shot was in December of 2021. Excuse me. And so, yeah, what to make of it?
Well, are you going to take any more vaccinations, or are you done now?
I'm done. I was a very compliant person. Again, nearly begging the Department of Health to let me in. I always got my flu shot in October or November. There I was at Costco to get that shot, and I just am not convinced that they're safe anymore. I have heard that the flu shots are even on an mRNA platform, so maybe I've had more mRNA than the 3 COVID shots. I don't know. I don't know if there's even a way to tell, or whether that's productive to find out.
The main thing is you know the real dangers now, so going forward you know how to protect yourself. Don't get vaccinated.
Absolutely.
Thank you for telling your story.
Thank you.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.